You know, I kind of just wanted to get some of your thoughts on what do you think makes a good memoir? Like, is it the storyline? Is it how vulnerable the author is? Is it the salacious ones, you know?
I definitely think there has to be a level of vulnerability and honesty for it to be a good memoir. As you know, I'm quite critical of all memoirs and autobiographies for that reason. I think that they go into these projects trying to shape their own narrative and trying to shape their history, and oftentimes it's just not fair to us as the reader, because they are picking and choosing what they want to present to us. And I believe that wholeheartedly, like in documentaries as well. When, like, I watched the Nas documentary, or Quincy Jones, or even recently I watched Kanye's documentary. You know, he's in charge of presenting himself. So, you know, what is he going to present to us? You know, I watched another documentary on a jazz musician. It's my favorite documentary. The jazz musician is Lee Morgan. He was not in charge of telling his story. And it's like a really honest, truthful, his backstory is he was this like young phenom. He started playing with Dizzy Gillespie when he was 16 years old. He played the trumpet. He got strung out on drugs. Was in a relationship with an older woman. I don't think that's germane, but she was older, and he was messing with drugs and other women. This woman that he was living with, this older woman, approached him and killed him in a club, and he was just like 35 years old. He is Lee Morgan. The documentary is called I Called Him Morgan. I'll put it in the chat. But so he's dead already. And they just found some footage of him, and they also interviewed his partner who killed him. So it's by far the best documentary I've ever watched. Except for, like, I love Ken Burns and Rick Burns and all those guys. But yeah, and he's just an important person to know if you like music, if you like jazz of the 60s and 70s. He's an important person. You should know his name, because there are a lot of his songs that, you know, even if you're not into jazz, but you just are familiar with certain tunes, some of his tunes, like the Sidewinder and the Gigolo, and they're like these tunes that you know when you hear them, but you might not know the musician who's playing them. So yeah, but anyway, that's why I feel autobiographies suffer, because the author, the person living the life, has too much say in presenting their narrative.
Yeah, definitely drop that documentary in the chat.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
But yeah, just like that though, like I'll chime in a little later. Does anyone else want to just kind of talk about what they think makes a good memoir?
I think that being honest with your story and truthful to yourself and your story makes it appealing to the reader.
Do you think if you were writing a memoir, do you think if you would be able to be 100% honest?
not 100%, but because sometimes we forget what really happened. Is we're looking at it from now, but it might have been completely different when it happened. But with the passion of, you know, telling our story, I think that attracts me, like somebody who's in their writing, they're appear to be wanting to tell the story and not embellish it, but looking at their perspective from where they are at now.
You know, and that's so interesting you say that, because it's almost like you have to write your story as truthfully as you can, how you remember it, and you almost can't get anyone else's opinion on it who was there, people who were there, because they might taint or alter the story that you are trying to tell, because they may remember it a completely different way.
Yes.
So in that sense, sometimes, you know, I wonder how fair memoirs are, you know, how fair they are they're definitely fair to the writer, but I do wonder how fair they are to the people who live that life that they're writing about with them.
Wouldn't it be good to have somebody answer to the memoir?
Oh yeah, like a rebuttal.
Yeah.
You know what? That's happening. Britney Spears' sister wrote a memoir, and Britney Spears just signed a deal like a couple of days ago, $15 million to like write her own. Because she's like, oh, Britney Spears is like, no, none of that is true. I don't know what she's talking about. And now she's writing her own book, you know?
And I think social media also makes that possible now, to rebut everything immediately and not wait. You know, 15 years ago, if you had an issue, you'd have to wait and write your own book or do some interviews. But now you can just go on Twitter or IG and, you know, rebut right away.
Post the receipts right away. Not a problem.
Right away.
Yeah. So Brenda, thanks for joining us. We were just talking about what we think makes a good memoir.
Okay. Yes, I was listening as you guys were chatting. I think for me, a good memoir would be, have it be as authentic as possible. I just finished reading the Sotomayor's memoir. And there's like a little disclaimer that she says that she will recall it as she pleases, and she's got the right to change some of the information, and she cuts it off where she cares to cut it off. And when I read it, I was like, okay, that sounds great, but then is this true or is it not true? So, right. I mean, I enjoyed reading it, but I was like, how truthful is it? You know? And I said, I know that she's trying to protect herself because she does work and she's a judge and so on. But it just had me like really a little confused. I mean, I enjoyed it. You know, she's had some specific recallings that, you know, that I enjoyed, but it also was like, okay, so maybe you changed a lot because it was too much for us to know about your life. You know?
I met her, and she's a wonderful woman.
Yeah.
And I can see why she would do that.
Right, exactly. You know, she talks about her family, and, you know, there's different things that she changes, and she talks about her struggle with diabetes when she was younger. And so, you know, certain things she went full on and talked about. And I think there was some stuff she held back.
She definitely held back everything about her marriage.
Yeah, exactly. So, so for me, that's why I was like, I like it to be as like authentic and as whole as you could possibly make it, you know, for the readers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had those issues when we were reading the book, that it didn't feel authentic the way she was telling her story.
Right.
Also, well, I've had those issues with every memoir we read, so I can't really pick anyone. I'm trying to think of one that really felt like good and genuine to me.
I thought How We Fight for Our Lives.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, but even in that one, I felt like at the end, he kind of tried to redeem himself. Not to say that, you know, it wasn't true or anything like that, but it just felt like he wanted, please forgive me, reader. I've sinned. Now, I want to return to your good graces.
Yeah.
But maybe we should, you know, in our selections, read instead of autobiographies, read biographies. You know, just something to think about, you know.
I mean, yeah, because, you know, I think about it often. Like if I was going to write a memoir, I can have these critiques about these other people's memoirs, but I do wonder if I would not, you know, do the same as Justice Sotomayor, you know, and like take my liberties, you know, and write what I want and put what I want in and open what I want, you know, like.
The thing about Said, though, to talk about homosexuality is so brave. I mean, still, even now, you know, as progressive as we claim to be, it is still an act of bravery. That puts yourself out there to the public. I mean, you know, not only is he writing this autobiography, but he's also a public figure, and he also has to answer questions about it, like all the time, I'm sure. Where like Sonia Sotomayor, you know, it felt like she had to write the book because that was part of what you do on your quest to get on the Supreme Court, particularly after Barack Obama. Like all politicians, and I know she's not a politician in the, you know, in that sense, but yeah, but they all must write a memoir before, you know, on their way to their ultimate position. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What about if that had to do with her editor?
Could be. No, yeah, could very well be. I'm sure there's I'm sure there's a Sotomayor staff that, you know, it's not like she's sitting in a room by herself and not talking to people along the way about what she should include and what she should not include, you know. So she makes a book that is somewhat sanitary, because that's the image she wants to portray. And again, I don't know if she has any grit or anything in her life, or, you know, there is that sort of question of her and her husband, but we don't know, we wasn't there. So we got to take her word, you know. Well, not even her, but her, you know. She might have issues with, not issues, she might be facing her own gender preferences and sexual preferences that, you know, she was married once, barely married, and they called it a day. Maybe they both, maybe it was her, maybe it was him, we don't know.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, sometimes with things like that, we read this book, right? So with you kind of still having questions like that, it does make me wonder, like, if you're not, I feel like with a memoir, if you're not gonna go for it and leave us with no questions, no rocks unturned, then why even do it? You know what I'm saying? To me,
agree.
I feel like that's what makes a really good memoir. There is no questions, right? After this, like this is it. It's like this is the call sheet. You can go to this for all references, all information. Like it's in the book, you know.
Or make it focus what you are covering in the book, so that maybe you have to write 3 books to get the full story out. Maybe you want to talk about your childhood, then your college years, then your professional, so that you can really focus on each segment of your life, as opposed to trying to sum up the entirety of your life in 300 pages.
Right.
And whereas Said was relatively young when he wrote his memoir, Sonia Sotomayor is, she's an older woman. She must have been in her 60s, so she could have sort of broken her life up. And in the same way that Raquel is still relatively young. So she might have a second and a third memoir, in her, because she's still relatively young.
Mm-hmm. One thing that about this memoir that I found very interesting is that she skipped over the really, really big parts. The relationship that led her to birth her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
That was half of a sentence, how that happened,
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all realize, but in the book, maybe I missed something, but in the starting, maybe in the 12th chapter, she switches from calling her father Papi to Dad with no rhyme or reason.
I didn't notice that.
And I've never heard a Latina woman call her dad. I've never seen it written before in any of the books that we've read. I've just never seen it. I found that odd. And again, no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
So she said Dad.
Yeah, it was like sudden, right when she was looking, when she goes into him getting sick and her searching for the DNA, she starts calling him Dad, which I did find that interesting.
That is. I didn't even notice that.
Maybe she just wanted to make it interesting.
Or maybe
does she continue?
We should have.
Does she continue calling him Dad after that?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. She continues calling him Dad. She doesn't go back. She never goes back to Papi.
Doesn't go back.
Maybe
she wants to keep the distance.
Oh, yeah, I know. You're right. You're right.
She's becoming American.
Yeah, that could be.
Oh, yeah.
I did enjoy her when she was here last week. I thought, she was really down to earth.
Yeah.
And she gave such generous answers. And even the woman who mentioned that her science students were reading the book, she reached out and asked me to connect them. And she was so nice about it. So I was really glad that she was able to come. And it seems like
so was I, yeah. It's also good when we have younger writers in the space, to kind of, I think it speaks more directly to a lot of the people who are in the group. I mean, we have all ages in this group, of course, but it is somewhat demystifying when we have a young writer that so often that, the literary arts is presented as something like this kind of older and stodgy. But, here she is a young Latina, doing her thing, like in a substantive way, and she's not only just writing, she's making films, and she's a mentor, and she's a mom, and I think her daughter's also like an influencer. Her daughter has a big IG page, I think called Nueva Ricans or something like that. And she just did something with Moma, the daughter. So the daughter, Jolly is the name, Jedi.
Jolly?
I'm not quite sure to pronounce it either.
I think it's Jolly.
Okay.
Like jolly, like you laugh.
How do you spell it?
Like
She spelled it different.
It's like DJALI. I believe that's.
Okay. BC. Jolly Brown Cepeda.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh? Yeah.
Yes.
How'd you pronounce it?
I said Jolly because you said that.
I think it is Jolly.
Oh, okay.
Because
I'm the Jolly. Oh, okay, that's the home page.
Raquel's page is Jolly Rancher.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think it's a play on that candy, the Jolly Rancher candy.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not her daughter's name, but her website. So
gotcha.
Jolly. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I see what you mean. Yes.
I see.
Today at 2:00, she had something going on.
Oh, but she does a bunch of stuff.
At Ostos, she had a Zoom.
This was at MoMA that I saw.
Yeah, okay.
But, you know what was also interesting is when Raquel says, it kind of caught me off guard, but she said she changed some of the names, in the book just to protect people's identity. And I didn't read that in the book that she was taking that liberty, and maybe it is in the book, but for some reason I thought she maybe would have sort of let us know that she was taking that liberty to change names.
Yeah.
And which is cool. I mean, I definitely understand protecting people's identity, but also, a lot of people don't want to be in the book. And, if she has a last name Cepeda and the person's first name, might be a neighbor or something like that.
Right. But that's the thing though, like
people are gonna know.
People are gonna know. Like it's really hard, especially, these days to hide information. It doesn't matter if you did it, in the 80s. Like we can find out who you are now.
That is true.
Yeah.
And I wondered if I know she mentioned that when I asked her if she had gotten any backlash from anybody, the only thing she said was one of the mom's abusers had sent her an email. And I was wondering which one that was. I was a little curious. I wasn't gonna ask, but I was a little curious. I'm assuming though that it was the Haitian gentleman at the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
But it seems I bet probably Alice's name wasn't really Alice. That one seemed like a bit obvious to me. Not obvious, but when she said that, I was like, okay, Alice is probably not really Alice. It was just like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
And it seemed like so yeah, there are some unanswered questions in this. Did anyone have anything they wanted to bring up? It doesn't have to be about these last few pages. It can be about any of the pages. I was wondering when her daughter was born, but looking at her, I just briefly looked at her website. She looks like she's in her 20s.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know when she was born though.
Let's see if we can find that out.
Yeah,
since Raquel is I don't know if she's married or not, but she's in a relationship now, which she speaks of lovingly. And I think they have a second child together.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Yasmin.
Hello.
So yeah.
Yeah, you know, I've always liked reading about people's DNA, or even hearing about people's DNA, their ancestry, discovery, and what they found out. And I do like kind of at the end how she puts that, like at the very, very end of the book, there's like a how-to, like the DNA test kit instructions. I thought that was really unique,
Yeah.
to kind of place in here.
Yeah, there's a 10% of your DNA test.
Right. I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, I wonder though, I do wonder how, if that gave her, she doesn't really mention if it did or didn't, but if it gave her any closure. It seems like it did. It seems like it was something that, seems like it's something she needed to kind of move on really with her life, after her father got sick.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I couldn't really tell if it's something that fulfilled her, or if it was just a journey that she had completed. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know either. It wasn't like so strong as to what, like, I mean, we all have questions about who we are and our identity, but what led her, I didn't read all of the final pages, and this kind of came up earlier, I think from last week's reading, like what led her down that path though, that she wanted to, you know, kind of venture into that self-discovery.
Yeah, I wrote that question down, actually. I wrote down, because she writes on page 161, she's talking about, she's kind of like just getting into the DNA part of the book. And she says, I'm hoping that once I reveal his, talking about her dad's, direct paternal ancestry to him, Dad will become inspired to start sharing something other than clip notes about his life with me. And I wrote down, did this yearning come solely with the birth of her daughter or something else? Because she doesn't really give up the goat in that sense. So I don't know. I had that question too. Where did I think that, you know, it came from her having her own daughter.
Yeah.
Maybe that was like, you know, the motivation.
Also with the realization that life, it could end for him, and she wouldn't know.
Yeah. And then it come to find out her paternal grandfather, her father's father, was like an even bigger jerk than he was to her, you know? Like, I found that very interesting. Like, wow, he really, even though he was an abusive father, you know, physically, emotionally, mentally, he still was trying his best. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Considering the upbringing that he had. He was living on the streets at like 12 and 11 in New York City, wintertime, you know, in the 70s. Dangerous environment, you know? And he told Raquel this, about how someone from like his father's building, one of his friends that lived there, had taken him in. Once they found out he had been living on the streets for years, they had taken him in. And he said sometimes him and his father would ride on the same elevator in the building they lived together in, but in two different apartments. And they would ride on the same elevator together in just dead silence. Yeah. I can't imagine that. And I don't think I'm strong enough to deal with that level of avoidance.
I think the father was probably very damaged as well. Like, so guilty.
So guilty. Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't think about that. guilt is a really powerful emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But
I could just, that's what I like about the book. I could just see the father in the elevator, you know, like feeling so damn guilty. You can't even look at your son in the eyes, and you're right in the elevator.
But even if the father, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Even if the father felt guilt, what about the son? Like, couldn't he have initiated the conversation?
He was a teen, you know.
That's your father. I mean, that's not like, you know.
He wanted to make him suffer.
Right. I think another thing that plays a big part is ego. You know, there's a lot of things that are ego driven, even if you know in your soul that you should say sorry or you should initiate something. Ego plays a very big part. And sometimes that freezes you to not do what's right. You know, what's truly right. You decide you're going to stand in your own rightness, regardless if it's wrong.
And it seemed like he had that level of, I mean, completely unjustifiable righteousness had rubbed off on him. And it doesn't seem like he ever apologized to Raquel for the way that he treated her. It just seemed like they just, for some very bizarre reason, just kind of laughed it off.
Yeah. It's like the machismo.
That machismo.
They stand in it no matter what.
And that is just so unbreakable. You know, that goes from generation to generation to generation. It may weaken a little bit. It may become a little more watered down, but it doesn't really fade. It doesn't really go away, except with really, really old age.
When you absolutely need help.
When you die.
Right.
You know, because my uncle, he's 83. And he's completely ego driven even when he needs help. You know, that's just it. You know, he's born in Puerto Rico and that's who he is, and he's taking care of himself, and he will stand in that, you know, and you just got to figure it out and do it for him, you know, knowing he needs help, but he will stand in the machismo ego all day.
And it's like, what can you do to help them, you know?
You can't. Yep. You got to figure it out.
You got to figure it out, right? Right. But people die that way.
Oh, yeah. And I just find it interesting that, you know, Raquel, you know, allowed her daughter and her father to have a strong relationship, considering the way that she grew up. One would think that she wouldn't really trust him around her daughter. Not only because of the way that she was treated growing up by him, but also because Jolly's father is Black American, and that was like a big thing. He didn't want her to have a Black American boyfriend or a Dominican boyfriend or a Puerto Rican boyfriend. So it was kind of like, I did find it interesting that she was comfortable having him around. And I mean, of course, that's still her grandfather, but I wondered about that. Like, wow, she must trust him. You know, there's something must have happened that they were able to, once that trust was breached, they were able to mend it again.
You know what? Hi, everyone. Good evening. That's such a good question that you brought up, like this, having this interrelationship for the daughter to have with the grandfather, you know? I think maybe perhaps where she was coming from was kind of like, I have this history with my father, you know, that is fraught, that is abusive, but she still shared with all of us that she still speaks to her dad, right? That she still has this communication that is still open, and where it's with her mother is where there is no communication, right? So maybe, you know, from what she shared last week, so perhaps with her daughter, it's like, maybe she's like, I cannot, maybe she chose to not interfere with a relationship that her daughter could have with her grandfather, because then it would repeat this lack of history again, you know, which is what drove her to a certain degree, I feel like, to find out where she came from. So it would be like almost reversing all the work that she did to try to figure out who she was, to then have the next generation not have access to who they were. So maybe she was like, that's something she didn't feel like she could do, you know, because time could heal things, and grace, and maybe the relationship she has with her husband, and maybe the interactions her daughter had with that side of the family. I believe he's Haitian. But I'm not 100%.
Oh, is he Haitian? Oh, okay.
He is. Okay. So like, I think like that could be maybe something that, you know, without her being present or her speaking on it, maybe that's what allowed her to be like, you know what, I want to make sure this is a possibility. What I found really interesting is the approach that she took with the DNA as a means of, because it's so fraught. Like, I was watching some stuff online, and it depends on where I don't know if you guys spoke about this in previous sessions, but it depends on where you get this. The samples are based on the sample of people that do it. So sometimes you have this information, but if it's a small, tiny sample, it might not be as conclusive, right? And even so, like, if you find out that you are, by bloodline, let's just say that you are, you know, Scandinavian, but you have no cultural connection to any parts of Norway, you know, then what does that mean, right? Like, if your blood says one thing, but you are culturally something completely different, like, you know, I think that's interesting means to try to figure something out, right? Like, because it might not be as conclusive as one thinks. And, you know, just watching this story of these women that did such a thing, and they were not people of color at all, but they were twins, and they were getting these completely different results. And they were like, well, we have, right? They were, you know, and, you know, not huge, but different. Like, the percentages were different. So maybe one twin got 23%, you know, you come from, you know, most likely like Southern, you know, Italy or whatever. And the other one was getting like 12, you know what I mean? And they were like, well, how can we get this when we have the exact same quota, you know, blood? And they were trying to ask these people to explain it. And so I thought it was interesting, you know. So it goes back to me personally about, I feel like culture trumps blood at times, you know. I really do, because you can have one particular bloodline, but if you don't really have a connection to that, if you're not really feeling affinity to that, then how can you really claim that, right? Internally doesn't mean people can't rule you out, you know, because that's what I am, right? But how do you personally identify as it, you know? Because it's funny, because, like, you know, how I find that really fascinating, how we determine who we are ultimately, even if the blood says one thing, right? I mean, I think about Native Americans, like, that's the big thing happening for the indigenous population in this country amongst some of the nations, is this idea of like bloodlines again, and how like the United States government is stating that you have to have, for some particular First Nations, you know, blood quotas. And if you don't have a particular quota, doesn't make you a part of that nation state, you know? So that could be a problem in a family, because if you think about it, you know, your parents are gonna have a higher percentage of whatever that blood is than you are. So hypothetically speaking, let's say you're Blackfoot and your parents are like 50% Blackfoot, you are going to be 25%, because that's just how it works with numbers and math, right? So you can literally have in one family, by the time you get to the grandchild, you know, now you're dealing with an eighth of blood of Blackfoot. Doesn't mean culturally that person's any less Blackfoot, but it's just done for the United States purposes to be able to erase the indigenous people, right? Because then you don't have to do anything for them because you don't exist anymore. So there's a push amongst some nations to not have those blood quotas mean anything. And they're like, no, it's not about a blood quota situation. It's about who we are as a people, right? You know, so that's because you can have literally within one family, you know, people that are full-blooded and have access to particular resources, and within the same family, someone that doesn't, even though they're, you know, eating the same fried bread, it's like, well, damn, So I feel like it's a situation of like, maybe we all need to have a little more autonomy or a lot of autonomy on who gets to determine who we are before we leave it up to science to determine it. We might not like those results, So I find it really fascinating that that's where she went,
Yeah.
Understandably so, but I find it like interesting,
I mean, I think you just brought up, I'm sorry, Ron.
Also related to Native Americans is capitalism, that they want to identify because of how Native Americans who live on the reservations are sort of given a certain autonomy outside of the rules of the American government, which led to all these casinos. Both Americans and Native Americans want you to, or indigenous people want you to clearly identify, through blood that you belong to our tribe or our reservation, because there's money connected to. That's how a lot of reservations sustain themselves through these casinos, and they don't want anyone or everyone having access to those financial gains, potential financial gains, because a lot of these casinos fail.
Right.
And that's not part of the story.
Yeah. One thing, you brought up several great points, Yasmin, so thank you for that. And one thing that you said that I want to touch on, I'm wondering what y'all think about this, because I agree with you. Like her father getting older and her wanting to give Jolly a chance to have a relationship with him, especially the relationship that she never got to have. I can totally understand that. However, what I would question is, where is all that empathy for your mother? Where's all that empathy when it comes to the mother? I don't get it. I get it. I understand, let bygones be bygones. We got another generation here and we're just gonna like move on with the future. I totally understand that. But where's all she has so much empathy for her father and almost none really for her mother. I did find that very interesting. Like, if we're gonna do the DNA thing and let bygones be bygones, then you need that other half of the DNA. And I get it. Her mom had all of those kids. So it maybe would have just been too much to deal with, having Jolly in that environment, whereas her father, to my understanding, didn't have any other kids. I could be wrong about that, but I think her father just had Raquel. So maybe it was that too. Like, I'm not quite, but I do agree with you. But I did wonder about, where her mother kind of stood in that space of forgiveness.
Because her criticisms of her mother feel visceral. Like all those kids, and when she's in Boston and the changing of the accent and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like she really goes in for her mother as far as like anger. Yes. Her father is just like, he's just sort of getting along through life, not making the best choices, but it feels like she views her mother as making intentionally bad choices by having all these children and, where she lives and things like that.
I think it's also part of the cultural, the idea that the mothers have to be this way and that way and the other way, and the expectation that the father can be this way or that way, he can get away with this or that. And the mother is supposed to be this sacred, like moms cannot make mistakes. They can't abandon you. They can't do this. It's like you feel all these rejections from your own mother. That's like a big thing you know, how women are looked at in the Dominican culture. It's like, a mother should never abandon, a mother should, you know, and mother should, while the father get away with everything. They might say, oh yeah, but he's still there. She wasn't, you know. And you internalize all these things, and women, we're hard on ourselves more than anybody else.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too. Absolutely. And you know, it's funny when we're talking about identity, and I do talk, I didn't think about it until Yasmin brought it up, but it is interesting how she would go the DNA route to kind of not only have a strong relationship with her father, but also to gain some sort of insight on who she is. You know, it's that idea of like identity politics or identity policing. It's not new, but we're seeing it a lot more, where people are kind of like identifying, no matter what their DNA says, they're identifying as who they feel they are. We're seeing that a lot more today, for sure. Not only with older people, but with a lot of younger people. And you know, but I wonder how far it can go with, like, what do y'all think about this? Like, I'm just wondering how far, and maybe it can go as far as it can, as far as it needs to go. But I do wonder with people like, what's her name? She was like white, but she was pretending to be Black. Rachel Dolezal.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like, Yasmin, when you're talking about, you know, where does it end and where does it begin between this like cultural data versus the scientific data, these two are kind of like identities battling it out. I wonder about people like that. Whereas on one hand, you're kind of right. Like, this is who she says she identifies with culturally, no matter what it says scientifically, right? That's who she says she identifies with. However, you know, from that same token, the example you give with Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, they obviously identify with the culture and they're born and bred on it, but scientifically it also says something differently. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, not saying that you can compare the two, but they're on the same spectrum. And I think about that often, like, is there space for transracial? Is there space for identity outside of DNA that's not only gender? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question to pose, you know? Like, I'm thinking historically, it has happened like that for natives, you know? Like, one of my best friends was sharing with me, like, about 2 years ago, this idea that I never had heard of, like, the $5 Indian, in which, like, you would have, like, white people, I think at the beginning of the 20th century, that were, like, purchasing identity to be native, you know, or you have this, like, cloaking in nativeness. Like, you literally had Elizabeth Warren, who got called out by Trump for essentially pretending to be native and then having to apologize that, oopsie, I actually am not, you know? Because it's not as fashionable to be a part of, you know, to not, the way that I would say that Native Americans have been depicted in film in the United States has changed over the years. But you have, like, certainly, I would say in the last, you know, 30, 40 some odd years of a more romanticism of natives, right? You have, like, even though it's a problematic film, but you have Dances with Wolves, in which natives are looked at as being much more sympathetic for the eye, right? And then you have people wanting to be on the side of what is just, right? So I could see people deciding, like, you know, well, maybe I could be this, you know what I mean? I feel an affinity to that. You see it all the time when people say things like, my spirit animal is, which is really a indigenous, you know, serious thing to say, but you have people talking about that over frappuccinos and stuff. Like, my spirit animal is a frappuccino. And it's like, yo, that's very disregarding. Because when you understand the root of that, it's like, what did you just say? Like, what? So I think it's already here, but I could totally think that it's something that we have to place an eye on, you know, on, because who gets to determine that? That's what I hear you ask that question, because you can have someone that, in my personal opinion, when it comes to Rachel Dolezal, I found the whole thing fascinating. But when I said that out loud publicly, when she came out as this person that identified as being Black and still does, and like she now like claims to be transracial, and she's making her, I saw a clip of her on Cameron Hall, and I found it funny. I find a lot of things funny, but like, not that I don't get it. I just find a humor in it. So she's speaking to Cameron. She's got on these braids, because that's how she's making her money now, by braiding hair. And she talks about that's rooted in African culture. But then behind her is this huge flag of the African continent. And I'm just like, so she's all set up. It's like she done checked off everything, you know, to prove her this is what I am, you know what I mean? Okay, I got the braids, check. I got the flag, check. Like, believe me, you know? And this girl, like, this is a mockery a little. This is a mockery. Because you don't pick up the stuff that, you know, that you find you can capitalize off of. But
and now she done a DNA test.
Both her parents are white. Like but you know what, Yasmin,
that doesn't mean anything.
When we're talking about profit, and when we're talking about race, and when we're talking about being transracial, I hate to bring it here, but if there was some sort of profit to be made, or some sort of committee, if you will, that you had to go to and pay your dues, I feel like Black people would be, the top earners of all of that. Because when I look at social media, no matter what platform it is, all I see is a bunch of Black fishing. All I see is white people doing their best Black girl impression, but it's a very specific type of Black girl. It's like New Orleans, like Deep South, like it's the weirdest like representation. And I wonder because it used to just be Rachel, like it was just her, and it was just like she was making like news runs because her behavior was so outlandish. And now it's like almost every other white girl Instagram account is Blackfishing. It's that, maybe not to the extent of Rachel, but it is kind of that same idea of, I would go as far as to say pretending to be this like Black American, and it's very specific. It's Black American, like from the South, like person that they didn't even know existed until they got on social media and seen an account of a real one. So it's like, in that sense, at least Rachel did her research. She knows, she knows how to braid. She at least has seen a map and knows where Africa is, whereas there are millions of white girls, not only in America, but I seen a video that somebody had compiled together where it was like a bunch of different countries, a bunch of different Instagram accounts and TikTok accounts from a bunch of different countries. And all of the girls were white, and they were all speaking in this Black dialect. And they all had these like Black clothes, the clothes thing going on, and the hairstyle, and they were all white, and they were from all different parts of the world. So if anybody should be cashing in on this, it should be Black Americans, because look at what we've given, literally given to not only American society now, but to the world.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic points, for sure. I definitely think it's there, in terms of the culture being so rooted in, on what people want to be cool, and a lot of the cachet of coolness is Blackness. So it's like a quick way to just pick it up, and then it's like a segue into coolness. Or if you're a pop star, putting on you want to show that you're mature. You were a child star, and now you want to show your maturity, like Miley Cyrus, right? That's what she did. You know, she's like, I'm not Hannah anymore. I want to show you guys I'm growing up, so I'm going to put on whatever is popular for consumption of what I deem Blackness to be, and that shows my edginess. And so it's like a costume. Like recently, that's exactly what Kim Kardashian said for the cover of Vogue, when like people were talking about all the visual images that she used that were obviously inspired by an actual replicant, you know, actual replicas of art done by Black women. So she famously redid Nina Simone's portrait. She did like a still from Beyonce's Lemonade, and she said, I was tapping into my inner Black woman. So it's,
no,
I wish she did say it, but she said it. So, you know, and she said that with all, you know, she pronounced every letter, you know, so she, you know, and dotted at the period, you know, so
I mean, I guess that's the question though, like, is that?
But that's not, to me, like, that's just, it's like, whatever, I'm not as bothered, okay. I'm not as worried about it because it's just an imitation of what you think it is. It's not cool. You know, obviously Black people are not cosplay. So no, thank you. But these are real people that are past or still here doing art. So you don't get it. That's just incorrect. And I could have been easily said differently, like I'm very inspired by, but then I would be getting credit to, you know, or I want to pay homage to. Or while I look at the artwork that they've done, it makes me want to feel like it's inspired me to be this. That would have been more respectful, I personally feel, because then it would be placing them as people that should be giving value and credit for what they've done. But to be like an inner Black woman is just madness, right? But I'm not as worried about that because I feel that the essence of Black culture is something that's still ever being recreated again. And it's also something that's very unique. So you have to be a part of the culture to really get it. You know what I mean? So you could put on all the things that you think are it. And on a surfacey level, you would absolutely get it. But it's something to be said when you actually are part of the culture. I love Marcus Samuelsson, the chef. And I read his book, Yes, Chef, right? And one thing he said in it that has stuck with me, he talked about like, you know, growing up in Sweden and the foods and how like his palate has been very much influenced, as at least in this book he shared this, based on Swedish food, because that's what he grew up with his parents, right? So when he's making that food, he knows the flavor notes that are supposed to be in that food because he grew up with it. It's his home food. It's his, you know, it's not his ancestral food, right? Because he's Ethiopian, but it's what his body knows, right? And he was talking about, even if he could learn another cuisine, which he obviously has done because he's a master chef, right? By all intents and purposes, he is in his field considered such. And he won't necessarily get those flavor notes just right because it's based on culture. So he talks about how, you know, some things are in the culture of the people you grow up around. So even though he probably can very well do a wonderful baked macaroni and cheese from Black American culture, right? It might not be quite right because that's not the flavor notes he grew up on. And so I feel like that's why I'm not so worried about the fact that what is being replicated in social media, because like you can't get my flavor notes, dude. You could just maybe like, oh, I heard that they dice it up like this, you know. But you don't have all the other parts that go into that. So you're just replicating it. And anytime Black folks have found like we are consistently, you know, culture is culture, but like the way that we reproduce things is so rapid that by the time it catches on to mainstream and becomes a TikTok sensation, the youth has already moved on to something else. So we're always a step ahead because that's, in my opinion, what happens when you are, you know, finding a way to express yourself without being seen to a certain degree, you know? So I'm not as worried about it, but at the same time, I don't want to belittle, like you brought up, you know, in a very good way, Brandon. Like, it is concerning because while I'm not as concerned because I look at it like you can't do what I do because that's not who you are. I I am interested in how those things get pushed to the front of the algorithm. You know, like I was really inspired by the TikTok youth who were like, we're not doing any more dances. This happened last year, right? They were like, no more, because every time we do these dances based on these popular songs, and we come up with a choreography for it, and we put our blood, sweat, and tears, and labor and talent into these things, they get picked up by someone that is not us, and usually someone that's young and white and a young woman. And while this person is admiring this, they get pushed as not only the creators of it, but they get opportunity to benefit economically from it. Yeah. And so I was really proud of these young people saying, we're not doing that anymore. So like, I think that has to happen more. Like, you know, like people don't like when people buy counterfeit Gucci bags, right? They're like, hey,
it's a federal offense.
My trademark, right?
It's a federal offense. It's protected under federal law.
I didn't know that. That's dope, you know, you can't do that. So it's like, I think we have to have respect for culture, you know, and not have everyone just capitalize off of it. And I think that has to come with a recognition of what you're doing is respect worthy. You know, there is a talent in what you're doing, you know, it's not just anyone could do that type of thing.
But that's been happening for centuries with the, you know.
There are these Dominican women, this mom and daughter duo, who started teaching bachatas, like old school, like just on TikTok. And to my understanding, like Dominican bachatas, you really can only learn like at home. You know what I'm saying? They're not like taught in like dance classes. And it's just like this mother and daughter, you know, in the Bronx, you know what I'm saying? It's and they're just, you know, doing what they would be doing at home on any given Saturday night, right? And to this very specific type of music, right? And it kind of caught on, and they started doing more of them, and they're actually really cool. And then like these other like accounts started popping up with these white dance instructors who had clearly just copy and pasted, like just completely snatched it and started like selling their services or putting like this, I don't even think they knew it was called bachata. I think they were just calling it a form of like salsa. And was like just stealing it basically and putting it in their roster. Like, oh, come learn this dance, you know, for $50 an hour or something. And someone like caught on and was like, you didn't even know about that before. You obviously like looked at that Instagram account, learned it, because they show it to you very slowly. And then just like regurgitated it, and you know, you're making a profit off of it. But you know what, and all of that, Yasmin, but also, and I want to hear some other thoughts, but one other thing I was thinking was, why isn't there just more sharing? You know, I don't think I'd be that mad, or not even mad. I get a little offended sometimes, but then I'm like I kind of brush it off, because I know like you may have the noodles, you may have the sauce, you may have the butter, you may have the cheese, but you don't have the recipe, you know, so I'm really not that pressed about it. But I do just wonder, why isn't there just more sharing? Like white folks know how to, I don't know, like
hamburger.
Not even they make good hamburgers, but they know how to like they know how to like, for example, get certain tax breaks that just not a lot of other cultures know. You know, they know how to like, they know where to go, for example, to invest in certain stocks.
Right.
You know, they know, you know, they know some stuff that they're not sharing, you know?
Right. I think what you all have said is, there's people who generally appreciate other people's cultures and ways of being, and grow up like it. Like, you know, in Santo Domingo, you've got an influx, and in Puerto Rico, influx of Asian culture. They're living there, they're, you know, speaking Spanish better than some of us. And, you know, that they really feel they are Dominican. They have kids, they're born there. I think there are people who generally believe it, appreciate it, acknowledge it, honor it. But there's always a small segment, 1% of it or more, that profit over it. And when somebody profits over it, then it almost dilutes it. And doesn't make it sacred and whole anymore. And then that's where it becomes abused. And then that's when we get upset by it. So we wouldn't mind sharing and enjoying it and people honoring it, just like we invite our friend from another culture to come to our house and they love it and they ask questions and what is that you're eating and so on. But then suddenly, if they came over and learned how to make pasteles, and now suddenly they go home and say, hey, look, that's a business. Let's start making it to profit over it. And you feel like disrespected, you know? And I think that that's what's gone on all these years, that we've shared it, but then there's been a small slice that has abused it. And,
one big example, that Goya.
And apparently, like, not only, yes, that is the perfect example.
Right.
Ron, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I don't know if it's as easy as we're making it out, that like these dancers on TikTok or IG stories, that they will stop. I think that because the currency of social media, or to become an influencer, it is so accessible now. And I just, that desire to make, because I mean, a lot of these, at the end goal is capitalism. A lot of these people are dancing in front of the camera every day, not the Black kids, but the white kids, because, you know, they get views, and those views are translated into hits on the ads that might be served on their page. So I don't know if Black kids who would probably be poorer, making certain assumptions about, you know, how the dollars white to Black is so small, much smaller for Black people. I don't know if that will is there, that desire to say, hey, I'm not gonna share my dance with you because you white person, you're making money. I think there is always hope in the Black person that they can make that money. Now, it doesn't happen because then white people aren't as attracted to Black people as white people are attracted to white people. But I think there's always that hope and longing for young Black people who are, you know, who are striving to, who think they can dance their way to being Rihanna. And they can't, but they believe they can. And I don't know if I'm speaking they as a group, I know I shouldn't do that, but if the will is there just to stop cold and like almost form a union of Black TikTokers and say, listen, we're not doing this anymore. I think some will stop, but I think that others will just kind of fill that void.
I mean, yeah, I think about this often, like look at football and basketball, look at athletes, major, you know, these major sports organizations. We've known for years, for decades, like that's basically, you know, the slave trade all over again. Yet that doesn't stop people from dribbling balls. That doesn't stop people from catching touchdowns. I don't even know if that's what you call them, but you know what I mean? Like it doesn't stop people from aspiring to get to the league, you know, and however, I'd see it's changing for sure. It's changing little by little. And I think that
everything that Colin Kaepernick took a stand for came to fruition. You know, before George Floyd, before Breonna Taylor, before all these sort of recent killings, Colin Kaepernick took a knee to address police brutality and the treatment of Black people in America. At the time, he had a whole bunch of, you know, other people of all races behind him. Since then, like, you know, this year, I can't recall, you know, anybody taking a knee. The NBA has been like, you know, they're a little different, but as far as the, you know, National Football League, I don't recall, you know, Colin Kaepernick is completely out of football now. There's no way he'll be let back into football. But, you know, it kind of had its moment. It got worse, it seems like, for many Black people. And, you know, that moment has passed. As far as the NFL is concerned with their protests, and they have more power than any, you know, as a collective union, the NFL Players Association, I'm sure, has as much power as any union in America if they want to exercise their power.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it comes down to also like utilizing the tools that you have in you know, within your grasp, you know? So like I used to be a preschool teacher for about 4 years, and I was a part of the union as a preschool teacher, DC 137. And I did not really utilize my space as a preschool teacher as a union member, even though my money went there, I paid dues for it, even though they were there to absolutely support me if I had any challenges with management. But in terms of like going to the meetings, in terms of really being involved, even though I had bought into that particular part of the system, I did not actually participate in it. Now, some of it personally was because of my youth at the time. I was younger than I am now, and not really seeing, wow, this could be something I could really utilize for the future in a really positive way. That was like a personal decision I made at the time. But I think that it speaks so much to like the awareness of recognizing the power that you have, right? And how those things are encouraged for folks to utilize, you know? How are we going to be proactive in whatever avenue that we have? So like, yes, I do hear what you're saying, Ron, in terms of some youth not wanting to be a part of a group of people that are advocating for ownership of their choreography, which is a part of what would happen anyway in dance, right? And having some young people saying, I just want to get my stuff out there. I want people to see me. People copy it. It doesn't matter. Because that's also what's pushed culturally of this idea of I want people to see me, because it's a very much, you know, likes do equal money, you know, and you get a certain amount of likes, you get a certain amount of going viral. And I think we all have witnessed people going viral for things that we can't believe that they actually just did it. You know, you're like, for what, right? But I do think at the same time, you did have enough people that signed up to do it. And I think that if young people are given this opportunity to see that there is a alternative to what's being promoted, I think that with a certain amount of political education, they can take advantage of it. So maybe if I had a coworker at that time who was a little older than me, would have been like, you know, yeah, you're paying these union dues, but you can do this, you know, you can do that. I might have been more encouraged to do it. I didn't really have that in my immediate environment where I worked at. People were signed up to be a part of the union, but we weren't actually participating in it, you know? And those things make a difference. I think it's like for Kaepernick, you know, people saw that what you just said, which is really true. You know, he wants to play. Like he did some tryouts and stuff, you know, which he visibly wore like a Kunta Kinte, I think, shirt, which showed where he was coming from politically, but he wasn't picked up because, you know, they're not picking him up. So he essentially is being blackballed in front of us, you know, and we can all see it in real time. So that can absolutely deter folks from wanting to take that same route, right? But if you have this understanding of consciousness of like, you know, if we as a collective determine that this is how things are going to go and see how we can influence things, then you might be more inclined to have more people on board. You know, so if you had a consistency of people taking knees or people saying, you know what, I really support him, so I'm not going to watch the game, or I'm not going to participate in the Super Bowl as a halftime show, or they're not going to get us to do that, then that's a way of collectively saying we support. But I think it comes back to your consciousness, you know, and connecting it to the book is the same thing. It's like some things we're not even aware that we're doing that's, you know, harming us. Like, I don't think based on reading the book, that her father was as aware of how much anti-Blackness was harming him and his daughter, right? I doubt it. I don't think he saw it that way. You know, he probably saw it as, this is the way that you're going to succeed in society, because being, you know, anything close to Blackness is looked down upon, and I don't want my daughter to have that life, you know? So he made this conscious decision to, you know, let's not have these kind of bonds, right? Let's not have this upliftment. So I think like it's sometimes people do things without knowledge of why they're doing it. And if you're not encouraged to see things a little differently, you know, you can replicate it and not even realize it, you know? It's such a part of the human experience, you know, how we pass on certain traits and ideas. So it's really profound. But I think, you know, it behooves all of us to be socially aware of like what we're passing on, you know. That's why I do think this book is so powerful, because she really not only shares her own personal struggles, you know, and her, you know, turbulent childhood in such a very poignant way, you know, but she also offers a sense of hope, you know, at the same time. Mm-hmm. And this journey of like, I'm going to figure this out, you know, that is something I think we all can pull from, you know, if you have a turbulent childhood or not, you know, like really, you know, looking into your past and reckoning with it. And that's something that can apply to all these situations, you know, like what if the NFL really looked into the past and was like, what kind of organization are we? You know what I mean?
I mean,
it genuinely looked
an
into
organization that encourages people to get hit in the head multiple times to the point that, you know, these like, what are those the CET?
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is an organization that encourages brain damage, you know, so they've never been like this center for moral compass. They've never been that. And, you know, I was thinking about this while you were talking. Besides the players, besides the actual people strapping up and playing on the field, the NFL does not need Black or Hispanic people. They don't need us for what? Those tickets, people that are buying the tickets are white. The people who are, for the most part, coming to the games, buying those really expensive jerseys, buying all of this like stuff that keeps that organization going, mm-hmm. for the most part, they are white. The majority of them are white. You look in the stands, besides the players.
But they need Black players.
They need the Black players. Yeah. That's why I said besides the players, they don't really need Black and Latino people. Like they could give or take us as fans, I think, you know, but for the most part, and that's really with the MLB, the NFL, and the NBA, for the most part, when you look in and I used to work for the Atlanta Braves, and for the most part, like at the stadium, and for the most part, every single fan, or not every single, 90%, a strong 85 are white. They could really do without us. It would be economic for them to say, you know, to segregate themselves almost. It would be, they don't really have to cater to our needs because we are not their demographic. Their demographic is white people who have money to spend and who love sports, who love the people like football because it is violent.
Well, it's a big business. It's a gambling business.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's definitely about gambling now.
Right. And did y'all see that New York now, you can gamble in New York legally now? And I guess that was for the first time in years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were never allowed to gamble in New York legally.
You couldn't do sports betting.
Right. Sports betting. That's what they call
it. Yeah.
So yeah. We got about 5 minutes left. Does anyone want to bring up something we haven't touched on yet? Even though this has been a small group, this has been a really great conversation. So thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate it.